Well, hello there. My name is Charles H. Clyburn, and I'm the host of The Art of Storytelling. And we're very fortunate today, since it's the month of February, the shortest month of the year, but yet and still a very important one. Frederick Douglass was born in this month. Abraham Lincoln was born in this month. Presidents were born in this month. But most importantly for today's discussion, it is Black History Month. And we have some distinguished guests with us today who are going to talk about the reasons why we even have Black History Month. The first person I'd like to introduce to you is a very good friend of mine and has been a friend of mine for many, many years. He is an entrepreneur. He's the Chief Operating Officer of the Bryant Mitchell engineering firm. His name is Landon McCall. Thank you for being here, Landon.
Happy and privileged to be here, Charles.
All right. And just to his left is a retired Montgomery Public County public schools educator. Her name is Marjorie Scott.
Thank you for asking me. It's a privilege.
All right, all right. Another person that has joined us today is a senior managing consultant. Her name is Jacqueline Steele McCall.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Clyburn.
Okay, you're very welcome. Last but not least, sitting on the end here is a good friend of mine and is also a person who cuts my hair and has been doing that for, 10 years or so. His name is Shannon, and we welcome you to the show today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, all right. Distinguished guests as they are, the subject of Black history has other people wondering why we even have this. There are people like Morgan Freeman, who has been quoted as saying he was against Black History Month because he believes that Black history ought to be a part of American history. But we'll talk about that some more. There are people who don't understand why we're even acknowledging African Americans for their deeds and accomplishments, because some of those were not looked upon as gathering in that spirit of what the United States of America is about. We'll talk about that too. But let me stop talking, because I want you to hear from these people. And the first person I want to talk to is Jackie. Jackie, why is it that we have Black history?
Well, I think that we celebrate Black History Month because traditionally people overlook the history of African Americans in this country and overlook the contributions that we've made. And I see it as being something that's taught primarily in African American schools, while it's something that the general population should be educated on.
Where did you go to school? What area did you go to school? And if that was, wherever that is, did you celebrate Black history? Did you talk about that as a whole? Was it a segregated school?
Well, I attended DC public schools. I went to Charles Young Elementary School. And I must say that we received a quality education, and a lot of it was about Black history from our Black instructors.
Okay, very good. Well, Marjorie, you were in the school system for quite a while, and you're now retired. What grade level did you teach?
I taught high school, but I would like to piggyback on something that Jackie alluded to, and that was her formal education as a child.
Yes.
She was in the DC public schools. I, on the other hand, was in a segregated situation in Virginia, born and raised in the Norfolk, Virginia area, as a matter of fact. And that school system was quite different in that we were exposed to Black history at a very early age, and it was, because it was segregated, they did concentrate or focus directly on the accomplishments of Blacks and their contributions, because it was not included in the history books. It was not included in the curriculum that was provided by the state or the curriculum that came down through the city. And as a result of that, the communities, which were really tight during that period of time because they too were segregated, focused on making sure that the children in the public school system were exposed to the accomplishments of the African Americans. In that particular time, we called them blacks, we called them Negroes. And I'm dating myself by saying that, but that's what it was.
Sure. Well, Shannon, I understand that you grew up in New York City, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you went to public schools?
Yes, I did.
Okay. What was your take on, or your remembrance of when you were growing up, elementary, high school, on the subject of black history, or was it a subject at all?
Actually, it wasn't much of a subject. My first 8 years of school, from first grade to 8th grade, I was in a Catholic school. And then I went to a public school for high school. And in Catholic school, for as far as I can remember, there was not much talk of black history. Also in high school, as far back as I can remember, there wasn't much discussion of Black History Month, even though in history classes there probably was a little small portion that talked about the slavery experience, but wasn't really in depth. That being said, I've took the opportunity to pick up books on my own and did my own reading and research, and it's quite fascinating to find out how deep the slavery experience actually goes and what it all entails, and how it even today affects young black as well as older black people in how we treat each other. So that slavery experience really did a mental job on us as a people and how we treat and how we react to certain situations. But getting back to Black History Month, it's quite astonishing that the school system, even today, they just give you a little tip of the surface. They don't really go too heavy into it. They'll just, you know, give you a small highlight of what Black history is, but they don't really go too far in detail to talk about the different people that have done things for the community, as well as inventions and things that people today can use. Mm-hmm. So I think Black History Month, it needs to be broadened. It needs to be talked about a lot stronger than what's taking place now.
Can I piggyback?
Sure.
Can I say one thing
Sure.
really quick? I'd like to expand on what Mr. Shannon was saying, because I just recently read something and it talked about the fact that you don't go into a lot when you talk about Black history, that you don't talk about the fact that we are a people that had a culture and a history that taught people from other cultures before we came to this country. So there was a life for African Americans in Africa before we came to America, and we really don't talk about that. We need to talk about that more.
No, thank you. Landon, you went to school in Buffalo, New York.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I did.
Rather well, yes.
Yes. Can you remember back at PS 74,
Right.
where you were, what was your experience there in terms of being in the minority in the Buffalo public school system?
Well, there are two things that I can say that sort of capsulize my experience in grammar school. When I went to kindergarten, there were 8 black kids in the kindergarten class. When I graduated from the 8th grade, there were 8 white kids in the 8th grade class. So our community transitioned basically because of the GI Bill, because I went to school in the early 50s, and we lived in public. I was born in public housing, and we lived there till I was 14. I had my 5th birthday living in a community in upstate New York in Buffalo that was a single-family home community, because people coming back from the war were buying houses and blacks were moving out of public housing. Back then, public housing was transitional housing. Now, on the subject of African American history, there was none, with the exception of the Underground Railroad, and the reason for that was that Western New York was a great part of the Underground Railroad. It was where the Quakers bought slaves, and I know this very well because it was taught in the school. It's where the Quakers bought slaves to eventually cross over into Canada and to be free. So that part of it we learned, and I suspect we learned it because of the participation of white people in that process. Were they not participating in the process, we probably wouldn't have known it. There wasn't a lot of black history in the school systems. Now, there was black history in the churches, even in the Catholic churches, because we used to go every Friday. We had a thing called religious instruction in the public schools. The interesting thing about Buffalo is that it was a ethnically mixed community. It had Jewish people, it had Irish people, it had Polish people. Buffalo used to be like the third largest Polish population of any city in the country, in the world, actually, more than Warsaw. It had Irish, Jewish, Polish, and WASPs. And it was the Western banking center and business center for the state of New York. So there's New York City at the lower end, there was Buffalo at the far west end, and the kind of business and things that were conducted there. So our communities were mixed, and we learned a lot about each other, but most of that history was history in Buffalo. It was about the labor unions and about the fights that went on with labor and big business and steel, because that's what was there. But there was not a lot of ethnic, not of black history that was shared. Now, we learned Jewish history because they had the Jewish holidays, and we learned about that because they dominated the educational system. We knew about the Polish kids because we played ball with them and they shared what was going on. But there wasn't any real focus when I was in school on black history or black contributions. There were some prominent black people in Buffalo, and we all knew who they were. There was an architect and a surgeon at the Catholic hospital and a couple other things that we knew as stalwarts in the community. But when it related to, and there's a lot of African American history in the city of Buffalo that we never interacted on. They do now, but we didn't back then. So I believe that we need Black History Month. I believe that we need it because we need to prepare our children. They need to know something about our history. My son and I had a conversation just yesterday, and he was telling me about a program that he got me to watch on TV, which is about athletes and the different conflicts in their lives. And he mentioned to me Ole Miss, and I said Medgar Evers. And he said, well, this is about the Ole Miss football team. I said, no, it's about Medgar Evers. Okay. And that's what, when you say Ole Miss, that's what it means to me. And then I looked at him and I said, now imagine how many kids may talk about Ole Miss and its football team and what's going on with it right now and have no relationship to Medgar Evers, which is really what Ole Miss is about. Because it tells a story about this country that is clear. I mean, in the 1950s, you know, I have a picture in my mind of them kids going to school with the National Guard and all of the things that went around all of that, from Medgar Evers to the young kids going to all of that transition. That was something that I lived through that's now history. And I have a difficult time sometimes communicating to young people what it was about, what it really was about. You know, I drove a motorcycle for WTOP right here when Resurrection City was here. And I was a courier. I was in college. I was a courier on a motorcycle. And I saw it from the level of what was going on. And then I took the film up to the radio station, the TV station, and then I saw what was on TV. And there was a difference between the two. But I experienced it, and I know what it's about. And a lot of kids don't even know that there was a Resurrection City and what it was. You know, what they may know about is what's the recent thing that they did about the economic system where they had the people building 10 houses in all of the squares around the country last year.
Occupy USA.
Which is really an outgrowth of that particular type of protest. That's where that protest came from, the occupying protests. You know, it came from the people after the Civil War when they came here. Then the soldiers came here and occupied the Capitol because they weren't getting paid and all of that. And then we did the Resurrection City, 100 years later, that happens. And now this.
Can we cut so we can adjust his mic, please?
I got it back on.
Yeah, it's all right.
Sorry about that. It just fell out.
Thank you.
Pick up on your next question. Were you finished with
Just
your
about. I'm just
Yeah.
going to
Okay,
cap
well,
it by
just pick
saying,
up wherever you want to start, and we'll just snip that.
okay,
Let me go to Shannon.
go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, Shannon, you mentioned going to Catholic schools in New York City, and it reminded me of my own experience. I went to Catholic school from second grade to graduation from high school, being the first black kid to graduate from my high school. And I can remember when the only time that black folks were mentioned was in American history when we got the part that Landon refers to is slavery. And the priest, I do remember, apologized to me. I don't know if you had that similar experience, or how did that affect you when you were in school?
Well, going to a Catholic school, what I do remember is my classes were predominantly white.
Yes.
There might have been, matter of fact, I was just looking at a third grade class picture that I have in my home, and I looked, the nun, she was white. She had on her all black robe, all the way to the ground. I was the only black child in that picture. There might have been one or two Spanish people in that picture, and the rest of them were white. That being said, I'm pretty sure that during Black History Month, nothing probably was discussed, because there's not enough black people in the class to even talk about Black History Month. And the mentality of the folks back during that time, I don't think Black History Month was really that important. Just like today, if I go to a predominantly black school or all black school, I'm pretty sure that there would be quite a bit of emphasis on Black History Month, because who better to talk to other than talk about people that look just like you. So Black History Month is something that is very important and needs to be discussed every month, especially since it only comes, we got 12 months in a year. So we get 1 month to discuss Black history, which I think would do a great service to not just us as a black people, but for other races of people, the Asians, the whites, the Indians, the Hispanics. I think everybody needs to know each other's history, each other's culture. And that would have us to respect each other in a better way, Now, it's my thought, one of the reasons that Black History Month probably isn't discussed in great length, I don't think the world is ready to realize and understand that black people did a lot for this country, did a lot in the world. We've conquered a lot. We've invented many things. We fought in a lot of other people's wars, and it's a great testament to us as a people and how far we've come. Why is this not being told? I think why make us look good? That's the only thing I could think of why Black history isn't talked about or discussed in great length.
So you
keep us under the radar. You know?
So you think it's a conscious effort to block out the accomplishments of African Americans in the United States?
Yes, I do. That's just my opinion, but yes, I think it's a conscious effort to block out all of the accomplishments and achievements that black folks have made in this country. And the reason being is it'll give us and keep us in an inferiority complex. It'll make us feel like we're not really worth much. We haven't done much. So to keep us at a certain level mentally so that we can't achieve or exceed our great expectations. So this is it's all pretty much planned.
Okay. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but certainly one that has been exposed and talked about. Marjorie, you taught in the public school system, in high school level. Was the schools that you taught at predominantly black or white or any particular color?
No, on the contrary. Actually, I've only been at one high school in Montgomery County Public Schools, and that was predominantly white. In fact, the African American or black population at that school was 7% and below during the 30 plus years that I taught there.
And what would be the student population number? Can you give us an estimate?
It ranged from approximately 2,100 in the early 70s to, I think the lowest was about 15 or 16.
Okay, all right.
So because the community turned over. When I first went, the community was booming and they had a lot of child age children in the community. But as those children grew up and the parents became empty nesters, they started to move out, and that's why they had the fluctuation in the enrollment. But getting back to the acknowledgement of Black History Month, what Shannon said was true for the school where I taught, in that because there were not a lot of African American students at the school, then the emphasis on African American history or Black history was not emphasized. Not only was the population of the student body small in terms of blacks that were enrolled, but so was the faculty.
I see.
The staff for many years never had more than one black male on staff at a time. And that was in excess of 10 to 12 years that I can recall. And there might have been even more than that. But getting back to the celebration of Black History Month, the black teachers that were on staff felt that it was their duty to do what they could to expose the students in the school to the accomplishments of African Americans. And I took on one of those jobs myself, in that I pretty much started a contest. I was an art teacher, so I was involved in the creative aspects of the arts, in the fine arts. And so I started a school-wide poster contest using the themes from Asala, who actually developed the themes for African American History Month every year.
Can you explain to the audience what Asala is?
And you're going to catch me here because I know the acronym. It's the Association for the Studies of African American
Life and History.
Yes.
Which were part of the founders for Black History Week, along with Carter G. Woodson, right?
Right.
1926.
Right, and their focus then was not to just get people to look at 1 week of the accomplishments of African Americans, but to give them, let's say, a venue to establish a focused portion of the entire year to highlight the accomplishments of Black history or the contributions of blacks. not to limit it to that, but to highlight it during that period of time. And so getting back to what we did at school, that was part of the poster contest, was part of our acknowledgement. The county itself also started a mandate where they wanted all of the schools within the county to have some type of a recognition program. And so they encouraged the schools to do so. They also provided materials, supplemental materials, and made it easier for teachers to get background information that would help them in terms of incorporating that information into their curriculums. Although many teachers did not take the time to do that, but it was still provided.
Jackie, you've heard Shannon's take on the exclusion of Black history in a lot of situations. What is your response to the conspiracy theory that he is espousing here?
Well, I'm not so sure that there is a conspiracy. I do believe that, as I said before, I don't think that they were taught. You know, they're not aware, just like a lot of young Black people are not aware of the rich history of African Americans. I'll give you an example. I worked in the housing industry for years. I had a very good friend who was also my coworker, and one day we were talking about Charles Drew.
Yes.
And we were talking about the transfusion, you know, the medical transfusion and the blood plasma system that he set up. And he refused to believe me. He absolutely did not believe that a Black man.
Was he white?
Yes, he was white.
Okay.
He was also from upstate New York, from Syracuse. He absolutely refused to believe me. And we finally had to look it up. In those days, you didn't have the internet. We had to access encyclopedia. It took a couple of days. And when he finally read it, he came and was very apologetic to me and said, you know, I never heard of this before, you know, and I enlightened him to a number of other things that he probably had not heard of. But I think that, as you said, Marjorie, that it should not just be a day, you know, that hopefully that we can introduce people to things that will cause them to want to explore Black history all the time, not just, you know, for a week or a month, but continuously.
In the society that Marjorie mentions, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, along with Carter G. Woodson, in 1926 started Black History Week. But the Black Students United from Kent State University were the first group that celebrated Black History Month. Subsequently, as you all know, and maybe the audience may not, is that Congress decided that they would incorporate that 6 years later into Black History Month, that it would be extended for the complete month. Now, some of my friends say to me, well, they gave us, speaking of other people, gave us Black History Month in the shortest month of the year, and that's sort of a slap in the face.
Right.
Well, take that for what it is. The fact of the matter is that Carter G. Woodson and the association did that, designated February because it was the birthday of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln. That was the reasons behind their establishment of that. But the question, Landon, I want to ask you is that we've heard from Shannon and we've heard from Marjorie and even Jackie to some degree about the education of the general public. My question is that when we have Black History Month, or the lack of it in some cases, really, is it more important that we educate our young Black people about the accomplishments of their ancestors, or is it important enough that we include other people, as Shannon had mentioned, so that they will understand the accomplishments of African Americans in this country?
Well, I have two responses to that. I think that there is ingrained in most Black communities, most Black families, and Black churches an understanding of our history. and who we are as a people, where we come from. The fact that most of us who lived and were raised in northern cities spent some time in the summer down in the South. It was an exodus that we used to have. Now, it didn't happen for me because I went from Western New York to Western New York. My grandfather had a farm in Western New York that I went to. But once I, later on in my life, when I came to Howard University and met people from North Carolina, began to travel through the South and met people, I began to understand this cultural thing that we have. Those of us that migrated from the South to the North, for the most part, send our children back to the South during the summers so that they can, and in all of that, you get a taste of history. My grandmother, when I got ready to come to D.C., my grandmother, who's from Montgomery, who's from Andalusia, Alabama, sat down and talked to me about, because she knew the kind of person that I was, that I had no understanding of discrimination, at least not in the sense that it was in the South. And this was in the early 1960s, and she wanted me to understand the differences of what I would find when I came here. But I want to speak a little bit to the conspiracy theory, because institutionalized racism. We know about the Spanish history in this country because they teach us about the Spanish-American War, they teach us about Teddy Roosevelt or whoever was running up the hill. They don't tell you that the people that led him up the hill were black troops. They just tell you that he ran up that hill. But the truth was
Buffalo soldiers, to be exact.
Buffalo soldiers took him up that hill.
Yes.
But you have to learn that much later in life from your own history experience. But it does speak to this whole idea of institutionalized racism, where it's not so much the people, it's the institutions themselves. The slowness at which it took Montgomery County to get to the point where they made it mandatory that you do something to recognize black history, okay? And even to this day, that is being done is nowhere near what it should be. And yes, it's more important to educate them than it is to educate us, because we have systems within our own communities that at least keep our children marginally educated to our history. But all of us here know their history. All of us here know their history. Not only do we know their history, but we even know their subculture history. We know their Irish history. We know their Jewish history, okay? We know their Polish history, all right? We know class history and the history of the landowners who were the only people that could vote at the beginning, that were white men, landowners. So we come up in a system that makes sure that we're educated in those facts and has no responsibility towards educating us to ourselves and to who we are and to what contributions we made to this system. Conspiracy, yes. Institutionalized racism, even more so. Because we have to change institutions, and it's much more difficult actually to change institutions than it is to change people. Because the people can change, but the institution doesn't. That's behind it. The people can know the history. They can understand racism. They can understand slavery. But until they change the system and put things in place that actually support this educational process so that these other people can learn about everybody that's in America. So yeah, I agree with you in terms of conspiracy.
One of the things, I'm just sitting here listening to Landon talk, and it's just, wheels is turning. One of the things that pops into my head is, since we're talking about the absence of Black History Month in the school system today, as well as in previous years. I do remember in history class, I do remember learning about Quakers and the Pilgrims. I remember that. Now, that being said, okay, so what happened? What happened to the other people? We got the Pilgrims. Okay, they come to the New World. Okay, so what about the people that were already here? The Native American Indians.
Right, exactly.
Okay, what about the slaves that were brought here? during that era? Did they not do anything to help with the development of the land or the country? You know, so this is why Black History Month is important, and it really should be generated throughout the country, and it should be like almost law that every school system should break down and discuss in detail, in great depths, the Black History Month and the accomplishments of our people and what we've done to help build this beautiful country that we call America. Because prior to us coming here, there wasn't much development going on, but once we got here, things started moving right along. Got that railroad going, got that cotton gin going so we could get some fabric. So, and that's just a tip, of what we've done as a people to help in this country. There's one other thing I'd like to mention, and then someone else can speak. I do, in my line of work, I'm a hair doctor, hair barber, a hairstylist. So in my line of work, I see a lot of people, all cultures, all races, all nationalities, and I treat them all the same. I don't treat the black folks better than the white folks, because when it comes time for doing what I do, which is to cut hair, I treat them all the same. Okay, there isn't any race hatred in my blood. I don't have it. I treat people as the person that they are. I give everybody the utmost respect, and I hope to get it the same. But one thing that I notice with the young people, if you talk to them about, say for example, God rest his soul, Michael Jackson. Everybody knows about Michael Jackson. He's a part of history.
Yes.
Michael Jordan. Everybody knows about Michael Jordan. He's a part of history, and these are black people. And I could go on and on. You take some like Ray Lewis. They just won the Super Bowl last night, so he's a part of history. So our young people do know some black history, but what about those doctors and those lawyers and those architects and those engineers and those people that invented something? How about, like y'all mentioned, the Buffalo Soldiers, yes, that won some of these wars for us? These are the parts of history that are not being talked about. So it's almost like the powers that be, or whoever's controlling the puppets or the strings, it's almost like they want us to stay entertainment focused. Stay in the sports and stay on the stage, but don't worry about the books. Don't worry about getting educated. Just stay doing your thing on the field. So, this is one of the reasons why Black History Month to me is important, because it covers the whole realm of us as a people, not just in sports.
And when Congress changed Black History Week to Black History Month, Gerald Ford said almost the same thing you just said, that it's important that we understand and keep in mind the accomplishments and achievements of African Americans in this country. Most of you, all of you probably, are too young to remember a documentary I want to say 60 years ago, at least 50 years ago. The documentary was narrated by Bill Cosby, and it's called Black History, Lost, Strayed, or Stolen. Mm-hmm. Okay? And in there, he talks about little known facts like, again, like you said, the accomplishment of reaching the South Pole is generally given to Admiral Perry. Mm-hmm. But as you search through the history books and understand that Perry was too ill to reach the pinnacle, and the black guide, whose name was Matthew Henson,
Right.
was the one that really was the first person to set foot on the South Pole.
Right.
Buffalo Soldiers, the interesting story about this March Up San Juan Hill, which catapulted Teddy Roosevelt not only into the governorship of New York, but also to the presidency. And I heard and listened to people who have documents to prove that when that happened, when the Buffalo Soldiers took that hill, that Roosevelt wrote a letter saying he commending them for their bravery, commending them for their outlook on how to do that. But when he began to run for president, the spin doctor said to him, "You're giving those people recognition and for an accomplishment that you ought to be claiming as your own."
Yeah.
So then he started changing his story and saying that the only reason the Buffalo Soldiers captured that hill is because he threatened them by gunpoint if they didn't do that, he would shoot them. So those are the little things in Black history that sometimes get construed. And the fact of the matter is, it's who's writing the history books. Jackie, you were born, you were raised in D.C. public school system. It, of course, was not integrated at that point,
No,
right?
it was not.
So how many white kids did you see in your, let's say, 4 years of high school?
I saw one.
One. Okay.
And I had to ask her if she was white. I wasn't sure.
I see.
You know, I wasn't, because I didn't associate with that many white people, so I wasn't sure. I didn't think she would be there if she were white. So I asked her, and she said she wasn't sure. So we went and asked her mother, and her mother said, "Yes, you are white." Her mother was white, so yes.
Okay, all right.
Just one.
And so was there ever any question in her mind, or was there ever any feeling of inferiority, particularly when it came to Black history?
Not that I could ever tell. Like I said, she just was, to us, I guess, another light-skinned Black person. You know, everybody was, you know, there were people, Black people come in different colors, and she was just a very light-skinned Black person as far as we could see. And when we had, I don't think I mentioned, but our school was named Charles Young Elementary School, and it was named after a colonel in the military who was an African American. And most of the DC public schools were named after African Americans. So I'm getting off task, but I don't think, and I remember her name was Linda. I don't think that Linda had any type of inferiority complex. I think we embraced her as one of our own, you know, just like we would any other person. We were kids back then. So.
Landon?
Let me segue into something. My first real in-depth educational experience with Black history, outside of what I knew about the Underground Railroad, outside of the fact that my father was a Tuskegee Airman, was when I came to D.C. D.C. was just a totally unique cultural experience for me.
That was back when it was Chocolate City.
Right. But it was even before it got dubbed Chocolate City. It got dubbed Chocolate City after I got here. But I remember getting off of the bus and seeing this beautiful Black woman standing there with a sign with my name on it. She was my campus pal. And she was an upperclassman, but she was the most beautiful Black woman I'd ever seen. Okay, so I went with her, and she had me spellbound, took me up to campus, showed me a couple things around, and I used to lay on the grass in the campus and look up at the sky because the sky was so blue. And Charles, as you know, in Buffalo, 7 to 9 months out of the year, the sky is overcast, so you don't get to see blue skies with the clouds passing through it and everything. But one thing was clear. There was, of course, a lot of Black history on the campus of Howard University. When I went to the founders' ceremony, which they have every year, and I saw all the Black PhDs and everything, it lifted me because I'd never seen that many educated Black people in one place. And the Ira Aldrich Theater and the history of that and all of the things that I learned, I spent more time in my freshman year, just learning about black history. Then a couple of years later, I got involved in an organization called Pride Incorporated, and we spent time putting together documents to document black history and to bring about black pride in the young black men. We focused on black men and to show them the legacy of leadership in history. And when you think about it, now this gets back to my theory about institutionalized racism. When you think about it, it wasn't really until Roots hit that the media really began to pick up the whole thing about slavery and things that happened afterwards. That's when Budweiser picked up that whole series that it did on the Black Kings, and it started putting out the posters. It was something that happened. Up until then, you know, I can't think of the lady's name, but the lady that was, the black lady that was in Gone with the Wind was her and Sidney Poitier and a few other people were all, and Bill Cosby were all that we knew. I remember my parents used to let me stay up on Sunday to watch Sammy Davis Jr. come on. I can't remember the name of the variety program, but it was somebody had a variety program. It lasted a long time, and the name escapes me now. But Sammy would come on, and Nat King Cole would come on every now and then, and eventually Bill Cosby. So, but my whole experience, my whole education in black history, in-depth black history, happened when I came to Washington, D.C. Prior to that, I only had little pieces. Being in the New York State school system, you didn't get anything. Now, we knew everything about white people in New York. You know, when you go to school in New York, you have to learn the state's history. You know, you have to learn, you have to learn everything about the state of New York, the way they do government, the whole bit. But there was very little African-American history that we learned. And when I came here, the schools were named after black people. And there were black people doing everything, you know. When the first job I had that was really a professional job, I traveled all over the country because we had a HEW contract, so we went to everywhere. Everywhere there was a HEW, a federal headquarters, we went there. And so I traveled all over the United States flying on airplanes and landing and going in. And I did research on where the different demographics of where people were because we were a public relations firm. And what I discovered was that there was no place in this country that felt like it did when you flew back into Washington. And once I had that experience, I began to think, wow, this is how white people feel when they go everywhere. The same way I felt when I would always come back to D.C. because there were black people doing everything. And the only other place I got that experience was when I went to the Caribbean because black people were doing everything there. But when you traveled everywhere else, you know, there were black people as porters and handling, but they just weren't doing everything. Now, this is back in the 60s and the 70s. It's a lot different now, but I still get that feeling. When I get off that airplane, I see that Capitol, we land in Washington National, and I get off the plane, and I look around, and I see black people doing everything. It's a totally different feeling than it is everywhere else. So this, to me, this town, this area, is the basis for my black history. It's where I became educated and what black history is all about.
Margie, yes.
Well, I was going to add the relevance of making what's going on now known to not only our youth, but the youth of America in terms of, I was thinking about the Buffalo Soldiers. I was thinking about the Tuskegee Airmen. I was thinking about Harriet Tubman and Bethune-Cookman. I was thinking about all of that. But how many of our young people now know that the director of NASA is a black gentleman? How many of our young people know, yes, what the accomplishments of blacks are that are relevant to today? I remember quite vividly setting up a display in one of the display cases at school, and one of the students that happened to walk by, a young black guy, teenager, said, well, I'm really tired of hearing about slaves. I'm not a slave, and I'm not interested. And so that always stayed with me, because I felt that probably the reason that he was not interested in hearing about slavery was because that's all he had ever really heard about. He heard about the oppression of blacks, but he never really learned about the accomplishments of blacks. And as a result of that, he and probably many other young black men were taken back by the whole idea of Black History Month, which makes me think that possibly somewhere in Morgan Freeman's experience, don't know, because I don't know the gentleman, maybe he also had a bad experience with the exposure of Black History Month. But thanks to the media, programs like the NAACP Image Awards, which were televised on the first day of Black History Month this year, and actually gave our entertainers an opportunity to spotlight the accomplishments of one another, and especially Harry Belafonte, who has done so much in terms of the advancement of black people. In his address, or his acceptance speech for being the, I think it was it's one of the award that he received was
Lifetime Achievement, maybe?
Yeah, was Lifetime Achievement,
Yes.
exactly. In his acceptance speech, he pretty much gave the torch back to the entertainers that were in the audience, saying that they were the most gifted and most talented that we have ever had in this country. And it is now their turn to take a stand and do what they can to promote to promote the black population, to promote black culture, and to accomplish what they had accomplished back in their day with the March on Washington and the advocacy that they had done during the time of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And speaking of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, Lifetime also had a program that spotlighted the relationship between Coretta Scott King and Betty Shabazz.
Yes.
And even though this was during my lifetime, there were things and facts that came, I'm assuming they were facts, that came out during that program that I was not even aware of. And I think it really served a purpose for younger people in being able to have an appreciation of what contributions were made by people other than those that were during the time of slavery.
Such as Michael Jackson and
Exactly.
other people, as Shannon has pointed out.
Other than your stage performers and
Right.
your pop singers and your athletes.
Jackie, let me ask you something. I know that some Caucasian people are confused. Confused because they grew up in a Buffalo, New York, or they grew up in a New York City where the absence of black history was very obvious. As I said, lost, straight, or stolen. Now we have a problem with trying to get them to understand that those things were really true. Charles Drew, for instance, the experience you had. But the question that I want to raise to all of you, but particularly to you, Jackie, is that we've confused Caucasians by the fact that we've been called different names. Okay, some of them derogatory. But the point is that we were called Negroes, we were called colored, we were called different names. And so now we're talking about black history as black people. What do you say about the definition of what, I mean, how do you answer that kind of statement?
Well, the first thing I want to say is my favorite saying. There are over 40 million black people in this country.
Yes.
And we are not monolithic. Okay, some people might prefer to be called black. Some people might prefer to be called African American. Some might prefer to be called Negro or even colored. you know, and people should address them as that, and I'm sure that when they take surveys or do whatever, that they give themselves that name. So we should be afforded that privilege, because for hundreds of years, we answered to whatever we were called, and we don't have to do that anymore. So I would say that it's about time that, you know, African Americans, black people, and Negroes and colored people get to choose what they want to be called. You know,
And not be defined by other folks.
And not be defined by other folks,
Okay.
because, you know, as you said, Negro, that comes from the Spanish word,
Yes.
black.
Yes.
So when the Portuguese and the Caucasians were bringing Africans over, they kept commonly hearing the Portuguese refer to us as Negroes, and that's where Negro came in, you know. So I think the other word, the N word, I don't have a feeling about that one way or the other. It doesn't offend me, it doesn't bother me, and I was taught that by a white kid, that one day he started calling me names, and that was one of the names that he called me, and I started calling him honky, cracker, you know, every other derogatory thing that I could think of, and he looked at me and said, you know, and then he looked at me and said, well, why does that bother you so much when I call you that? And I thought about it, and from then on, I just don't care. It's just a word.
Bill Cosby talks about one day his experience about being at a department store, and there was a white woman who apparently was a mother, had a little child with her, and the little child said, look, mommy, there's a nigger. And Bill Cosby said, where? Okay? So you know, if it doesn't belong to you, if you don't accept it as being yours,
Right.
and reacting
Exactly.
in a way that is defensive, then, you know, it's not yours.
Right,
So yes, I think you're right. Anybody else have any comment about the word or about the designation or whatever? Landon?
Many years ago, my grandfather, who was a Muslim, explained to me what a Muslim was. Because I asked him what was the difference between a black Muslim and a Muslim. And he explained to me in his words what it was. He had a 5th grade education. He wrote and spoke Arabic and English. But he also told me that, he said that you don't let other people define who you are. He said, you define who you are. And no name that someone else can give you can change you if you know who you are.
Yes, sir.
So, and this was, I was maybe about 9 at the time. I used to go to his farm in the summertime. He would pray 5 times a day to the east. And he was the imam over a group of people in western New York that owned land. And then I'd come back in September and go to the Saints Home Church of God in Christ with my grandmother. So I was raised with a 2-bladed sword that sort of got me understanding differences in people culturally. My mother had a cataract on her eye, and she had it for years, you know this, Charles.
Yes.
Before they had surgery that would remove them. So her eye looked a little larger than everybody else's eye. And in today's terms, my mother would have been considered handicapped, if you will, because of the, but I would walk downtown with my mother. I'd see somebody on crutches or somebody with polio, because back then people got polio and had the braces on their legs. And I would always look at them, and then I'd look up at my mother and look at her eye, and I would somehow understand in my own thinking that that didn't make that person a less of a person. I'm saying this to say that all of these experiences helped me to understand that people are just people.
Yes.
And culturally, we need to learn about each other. So back to the essence of what we're talking about. Black History Month, yes. More so for them than for us, yes. Because like I said, we know their history.
Yes.
They taught it to us, they spoon-fed it to us from the time when we were children. American history is white history. The black part of it just came to be, and if it wasn't for Alex Haley and the rest of them, we probably wouldn't even be dealing with it now. And I want to make one other plug. It's not really a plug, but I saw the movie Lincoln. It's an excellent movie. And it brings about a thought process about what Lincoln as a lawyer had to go to get that 13th Amendment passed. And all of the things that went around it, and all of the things that they said. But one of the most important or impressionable parts about the movie was when they stood up in the Congress and said, what next? You gonna let women vote? You know, and it's like, I just say to myself, you know, we're not the only oppressed people in this country. And when I think about slavery and I think about us as a people, I have to say, the Jews never let their slavery be forgotten. You pick up the Bible right now, the King James Version of the Bible, the Old Testament, it's almost primarily about Jewish slavery. Okay? I'm looking at it Sunday morning, and it reminded me of that there are certain things in our culture, even in Christianity, that codifies and substantiates their history. Okay? If I say Exodus, you know what I'm talking about. If I'd have said it 15 years ago when you was in, or 25 years ago when you was in Catholic school, you knew who I was talking about, okay? But you have to give a name to slavery. You have to give a name to black oppression. You have to give a name to all of the atrocities that happened to us. You have to give, it was, I mean, just think, the Middle Passage, as significant as it was, I think was slightly a little bit more than the Holocaust, okay? But it's not in any way equivocal in history when you think about it, okay? They can't even tell you how many people got thrown off them ships going, because the only ones they kept record of was the ones that got here, that they sold. The ones that they lost was in the process, and the whole process of us being property as opposed to people. There are so many significant nuances into what was into slavery and how it converted itself into racism and how we now have to purge that from the country even though we have a black president. It's all right there. You know, you can see it. So yes, Black History Month, yes. For them, yes. For us, institutionally, yes. And just like I say, the Spanish-American War is in those history books, and we knew about it, and it's going to be a lot more relevant 30 years from now when all of the Southwest is Hispanic, okay, and the whole thing of this country, racial makeup of this country changes, and they get back the land that was taken from them in the political process. Then everybody will understand. Then it'll be much more important to be American then than it will be to be Hispanic, okay? And you won't be able to deny the history.